If you want to go ahead and turn to Romans 12, we're going to start there, and that will be our inspirational passage for this morning. So we'll get to that in just a minute. So we're like at the, I guess, the 12th hour, like the 11th hour of the Peacemaker study. So if we were to kind of go back and say the starting point for us was Jesus saying, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." So there is this value in God's kingdom. Jesus is setting out the values, and he says, the people who are going to be successful in my kingdom are not the warmongers that are conquering, but rather the peacemakers who are trying to spread peace and live a gospel-centered life, right? So really quickly, what's one thing that we've talked about that has stood out to you? Or maybe, actually, let me ask it this way. What is something from the study that has come up in your daily life that you've thought of and like, oh, and it maybe has at least affected how you thought about a situation or a conflict or something you're in? Does anybody have any? Please say somebody has something like that. Yeah, Jesse? Oh, no, go ahead, Lori.
I wish I had this book going through my divorce.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
What would have been different outcomes? And you learn that it's a quicker process when you forgive earlier on.
Yes. Yes.
You let it wait and let it brew, it just makes it so much harder.
Yes. Good point. So the quicker that you resolve, and that's why Matthew 5, if you're on your way to sacrifice and you remember your brother has something against you, stop right there. That's how urgent this is, right? This is more important than you going and offering your sacrifices to God, coming and worshiping Him and communing with God. What's even more important than that is reconciling with your brother, right? Matthew 5. Yeah, Jesse?
I really like what he said. Forgiveness feels harder, but sometimes it ends up being a little bit easier. But also, for me, just recognizing that this takes time, right? And a little bit of practice, too.
Yeah, right. Well, I can't remember where I saw this, but somebody said unforgiveness is the poison we drink trying to kill someone else. Right? It is only detrimental to us. Yeah, April?
Somebody's got to pay the price. That really, it really makes you think through the smallest conflicts to the biggest conflicts that a price has to be paid. And so when we start with that attitude of forgiveness, that's how we walk through life, that's how we face the day. I feel like it's a little bit clearer. It's not easier, but it's a little bit clearer, and I have to remember that Jesus paid the price so I can walk through the day with that attitude and that hope.
Right, yeah. Kind of like the national treasure quote that we had from last week, I think. Like, the Declaration of Independence was stolen in that movie, if you remember. And the FBI agent's like, somebody's got to go to jail. We can't like have this happen and then nobody go to jail. Somebody has to go to jail. Who's it going to be? So Jesus saw someone, God has to have restitution on this. What's going to happen? Either all of humanity is going to be wiped out because all sin spread, death spread to all men because all men sinned. So who's going to pay that? It's all humanity going to pay that. That's what they deserve, right? And when someone injures us, what they deserve is to just be heaped upon, right? Like, hey, you sinned against me. You lied to me. So I'm going to punish you for the rest of your life because you lied to me. Or we do what Jesus did and we say, I'm going to cancel that debt. You lied to me. I'm never going to talk to you about that again. I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to be reconciled to you, not let it stand between us. I'm not even when it pops into my head, I'm just going to divert. I'm going to think of something else. I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to sit here and stew over what you did. Instead, I'm going to cancel this debt, right? Okay, so yeah, the outcome might be very different. Yeah.
With that, it's amazing how God works in you when you start letting that go. He does help you with that, believe it or not. I mean, you have to have belief that He's real, that He does this for you because He put it in place for us. He didn't just give us a lot of words to just follow rules. You know, you have all these rules, you have to do these things, but it works. His word works if you just give it a chance and you're really, really willing to give up on that debt that you want paid for. You wrong someone, we're always going to wrong someone. We have to make it right, but that's where our conscience kicks in and says, you did somebody wrong, go make it right. You might be the one doing it all the time, and that's okay. You might be the one that has to make it right, but the other people will learn from you, I think.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Mike and then Michaela.
Rhonda makes a great point. If you just look at this at face value, we're so overwhelmed and we try to overcome evil with good because we cannot do that. We have to have God's help and the strength and confidence. With Him, we can do it. On our own, we're going to fail. We're not going to be able to do that. It's just too much of an insurmountable objective to do. But sometimes we try to do it ourselves instead of trying to do it the easier way and say, God, I'm going to need your help on this one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and we need to remember God gives us that strength, and along with the command, He gives us the strength to follow through. Michaela?
Adding on to what Mike and my mama said, it makes me think a lot of the term Verstand by Mr. Weber, a sociologist. It technically just means like sympathy for human behavior and how other people act and what attachments they give to their actions. So also understanding that while they may have wronged us, maybe something else is going on deeper in the mind.
Sure. Yeah. And gathering all the facts really makes it important. It makes it important for us to listen, right? Yeah. Cool.
I think one of the chapter 10 for me was just the look in the mirror.
Yeah.
After all this that we've been, studying, I think one of the staggering things is the conditions with which we put upon forgiveness. And so when we look at how we react in comparison to how God reacts to sin, that's just the humbling part for me, because we go, well, I'll forgive you, and then these strings are going to be attached to it, and this is the expectation, and
Right.
We look for the promises out of these things. And so when we put ourselves in those shoes and you go, oh, well, this was my sin, and Jesus now says to us, well, I forgive you, but, and all these strings come attached, you kind of go, what have I done?
Yeah.
What am I doing? Like, you look at the true wiping the slate clean, and the choice that God makes to not bring up that sin to you again, to harbor that against you, and then we look, those are the very things that we do,
Yeah.
regularly, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, it's always staggering to me when we look at our comparison of where I truly am and how I'm acting versus God and His grace and how He was acting, and it's just a humbling reminder that I need to do better.
Right, yeah. Yeah, when it comes to when people wrong us, I feel like the story of the unforgiving servant that was forgiven and then went out and choked the person that owed him a little bit, that's gotta be the thing that's on our mind, right? Okay, Alan, and then we'll move on. We gotta move on to actually what we're supposed to cover today.
At the very beginning of this book, it really has impacted me, not only in the present, but also like, I'm just, specifically about how every conflict is an opportunity to glorify God. That's like a mind-blowing concept to me that I never even considered. But beyond that, it's like, there's so many passages about this. Why am I not even paying any attention to it in the past?
Right.
Like, he brings so many passages that we have gone over to our attention. It's like, thank you, because clearly I haven't been paying attention.
Right, yeah, I know. And when Lori said, I wish I had this book, like, yes, he points out all this stuff, but we've always had the Bible. Like, we've had it right here, and we've been reading all this and not really thinking about conflict as the most important time when we can honor God and glorify God and trust God. That's when our faith toward God is actually tested, is when there's conflict, right? So, yeah, for me, I'm with you. All the passages that are actually about our relationships with one another that I had just been reading and glossing over is just staggering and embarrassing, right? For sure. So let's not do that with this Romans 12 passage that we're going to get into here. I feel like this chapter could be titled, "What do you do when the other person does not want peace?" Right? So, and that's the answer might be not what you were hoping it would be. Okay? Let me just prime you with that. Because the truth is, a lot of times, you can try to reconcile, but we're talking about some minor differences that we blow up into major ones, right? Or choices where we have decided we are going to let this situation, this conviction, just really stand in the way of peace, right? So, so the peacemaking does not always go as easily as we would like it to. So while I think a couple comments were like, the outcome might have been totally different if I had been thinking about the passage, these Bible principles when going through the conflicts that I've been through, right? The outcome might have been different, but you know what? It might not. It might have turned out exactly the way it turned out, even if you went through that. I mean, it's a little bit of honesty here. I was teaching the Peacemaker class when we left Avon. I was teaching this material, right? So, and part of it was I saw we weren't all doing what we needed to do here, right? So it's not a guarantee. You doing what you ought to do and following all the principles is not a guarantee that things are going to go perfectly. Okay? So, what do we do when they don't, right? One more point of setting this up. So, I think you know this, but just a reminder, the book of Romans is written to what kind of people? What's the target audience here? I got Jews and Gentiles. Which is it? Trick question, right? Yes, both, right? Now, why was it important to write a letter to Jews and Gentiles in Rome? Gentiles, and he's correcting the Gentiles, saying you got to be patient with the Jews, because these Jews have been self-righteous in their entire heritage. Yeah, generational, back to Mordecai and that awful guy Haman, the Agagite, King Agag. You remember that guy? You ever notice that Haman was an Agagite? And that's who Saul spared whenever he was supposed to conquer, right? So there is a heritage of racism and nationalism that the Jews were bringing into the gospel. And then the Gentiles were like those stupid Jews, right? So as we're reading through this, I think it's fair to say that Romans is written to try and help these two groups get along, right? And yeah, there's a lot of theological, doctrinal stuff that he's saying, but then you get to the last 3 chapters, the last 4 chapters here, and the what, so what, the therefore is what we're about to read here. It's a lot of relational conflict. That's really what, it seems to me, what this book is about. And there's a lot of groundwork, it's Paul, so there's 12 chapters of groundwork, or 11 chapters of groundwork. Now let's see what happens when we get to the so what. So Romans 12, we'll start in verse 9. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Don't be conceited. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, "It is mine to avenge. I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you heap burning coals on his head. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Okay. What stood out to you there? Right. Yeah.
When he was presenting his upside down kingdom.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Good point.
This is not love in feeling, it's love in doing and acting.
Right.
It's not talking about a warm and fuzzy that you need to have, it's talking about the actions. That, I think it was like earlier in the book somewhere when it was talking about forgiveness, it's like God doesn't love you because you forgive, you experience the love of God and that drives you to forgive, basically, right? And
Right.
so this is taking that love of which we have received and letting that be in all of our actions.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he still says it's your enemy, right? It is still your enemy that you're supposed to be kind to, right? And you don't have warm fuzzies for your enemy. you struggle to want to be kind and show kindness to your enemy. That's why you have to say this, because if it were your friend, you wouldn't have to say, hey, you need to be kind to your friends, because everybody does that already.
Well, so you mentioned the word conviction earlier when you were saying they were letting this conviction, get in the way, right?
Yes.
Well, which conviction are we talking about, right? And so like I read something like this, and there's a lot of that where you just go, why is this, right? And so my mind immediately goes to, there is a higher purpose beyond ourselves, that God has, we have a proclivity to want to fight against our enemy and hurt our enemy and do all the things against our enemy, right? And so God sets the moral standard, right? I think I heard that in the sermon
Exactly.
recently.
Great.
Right? And so you just go, he is the morality, and there's something higher for me to learn from this, because at first glance you're like, ooh, that seems a lot of opposites from what my natural proclivity is.
For sure.
So then you go, there's a conviction greater than what I'm at right now, and I need to understand that.
Right. Yep. Very good. Mike?
The part that says, repay no one evil for evil, that's the part that we have to, it's an emotional reaction for us to do that. We have to just call time out and say, hey, I'm reacting to my emotions more than anything else right now, and I'm not reacting like I should give glory to God. And we just have to keep reminding ourselves, so we get that habit to do that.
Yep. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it is the disordered man that lets his emotions rule his thinking and his actions. The ordered man, he thinks, then weighs through all that, decides what his action is going to be, and then lets the emotions follow, right?
Right.
Good. Yes, sir.
Just a thought, because this is, and you've all heard this before, talking about love, it's agape love.
Right.
Which is directed by our will and not our emotions.
Exactly.
Because like you said, if this is unnatural for us, the first thing is to back up and hold your fist up, protect myself. But this is more, let's stop and think about this. Would I want that done to me? And then, so it's directed more by our will.
Yeah, very good. Yep. Good.
Brad, I'm gonna go
Yeah.
back to verse 2, which we didn't read, but
Yeah.
do not be transformed to this world, formed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind,
Yeah.
so that you may prove what the will of God is, which is good and acceptable and perfect. And I think that's kind of helps to set the stage for all this upside down business that he's trying to address.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that transformed word is the transliterated is the metamorphosis, right? Is where we get that word. So that is the word that we use for butterflies. They crawl in as this little worm, and they come out metamorphosized into this beautiful butterfly. How did that happen? And well, somebody said, if you ever get in the middle of that and you cut it open to see what it's like, it's just goo. Like there's nothing in there. Like whatever, when that happens, it's a complete transformation. It's not like, a tadpole or something where you kind of see some legs starting to come out. It just breaks down and completely transforms and reforms, right?
And just to take that analogy one step further, the worm conforms to the world. It literally blends in. It's so camouflaged to protect itself, you can hardly even see it.
Right.
And then when it comes out, it's so flashy.
Right. Yeah.
So that kind of goes to what is aside from glorifying God through this, right? It's like, what's the why? What's our goal in doing these things? And
Yes.
so, one of the, on 249 there, talking about Paul, said instead he taught not to beat down or destroy our opponents, but to win them over. And so you go in this, with the mindset of winning them over. And so how you overcome the unnatural is to cling to the purpose that's greater than you are, right?
Yeah.
Because if we just decide to set our own moral standards, mine's way different than yours is way different than somebody else's, and well, what I think is right in this, and there's chaos, right? And so it's like, we hold to the moral standard that is God, that He has put, and hold to that higher purpose, and we'll eventually tie this in, but when we talk about revenge, and, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, we still oftentimes think that that's our job, is to get the retribution.
Right.
And it's like, you just read, as we've studied this, you go, this whole time, I wasn't realizing that my job was to be the reconciler, to win them over.
Yep.
God will deal with those consequences in its appropriate time. He's giving us the time now to be reconcilers.
Right, exactly. Vengeance is His. Instead, if your enemy's hungry, don't go, oh, now I'm about to beat him down. I'm gonna withhold food so that he really suffers. Ha, got it. No, that's not the ethic that we have as Christians. When our enemy is hungry, we feed him, and we win him over, and we have a totally different goal. Our goal is not to crush our enemies; it is to win them over and glorify God. That's our goal.
Well, let's kind of look at this at like a local congregation level, right?
Yep.
We can get caught up in the, our attendance is superior to theirs, right? We're winning.
Yeah.
We're winning here at this congregation. We've got this going on. In fact, our presentations are way better. You ought to see our classes. You ought to, and it's just kind of like we can treat each other as our enemy, and we go, or we could just win each other over, and instead of an enemy, I have an ally.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's what Jesus does. He turns His enemies into His allies. He takes His enemies and makes them His brothers and sisters, right? That's what He did on the cross. You were hostile, right? While you were still enemies, Jesus died for you and made us adopted sons and brothers with Him, right? So Micah mentioned the Sermon on the Mount. Luke 6, he quotes at the bottom of page 247, "But I tell you who hear me," this is Jesus speaking, "love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you." And then verse 35 and 36, "Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful." So, and the thing that makes this even more is we were the wicked. Like He was kind to us. He didn't, when we were hungry and in need of grace and love and mercy, He didn't withhold those things and go, "That's what you deserve." He said, "I'm canceling that debt." He was merciful, right? So we can keep going, but I kind of want to also kind of move. So he talks a little bit about this idea of what Romans 12, he makes just some practical applications like controlling your tongue. Did you highlight anything on page 249 or 250 about any of that you want to share?
So he says there, I didn't mark this down, but, looking at it again. But if you react with harsh words or gossip, you will make matters worse. And, yeah.
Yep.
I think it speaks for itself, but, how often we, allow our tongue to slip and just say what's on our mind and not, give things a thought or.
Right.
Mull it over even. We just blurt things out because we're hurt and,
Yeah.
we're emotional.
Yeah. And I even think like our kids are, and we're right there too, but like the whole gotcha mentality, like, you know, and maybe we mean it in a joking sense sometimes, but we've almost glorified this idea of, if you're cutting me down and I can think of a cut down that's better toward you, then everybody's like, oh, he got you, right? Like, and I get it, that's funny, but really that shouldn't really be our practice. Our practice should be, oh, even if your opponent speaks maliciously against you or to you, do not respond in kind. Instead, make every effort to breathe grace by saying only what is both true and helpful, right? Speaking well of your opponent whenever possible, and using kind and gracious language of your opponent, right?
Candidly, that's one of the hardest things I've had to deal with
Oh, yeah.
years. I didn't grow up as a Christian when I was younger. I was in a business that they trained you and wanted you to do that sort of stuff. So even from a teenager, I was conditioned and encouraged to do that sort of stuff because that was the business that I was in. And it was a very hard obstacle to overcome over the years because I had to do a complete change in my personality and what I thought was, you know, expected to what God expected me to be.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Jesse.
Yeah, I like that concept, the conditioning, but it too, it is that instinct, right? It is that very, very base instinct. The conditioning side, it's almost like, how do you condition yourself on the other side? You almost have to look for, or raise that awareness to like, ooh, this is a conflict, or I have an opportunity here.
Yes.
For me, that's so difficult because when you're in any heightened moment, defense or survival is like screaming in your brain. And so I remember someone saying that to get better, conflict, you need to become better. And it's like, do I pray
Right.
for challenges here?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
like, can I
Yeah.
do that? Can I get better at that? That's difficult.
Right, yeah. When I first started the job I'm in, one of my first jobs was basically just to look for stuff that was wrong in the accounting system. And there were several reports that we ran and all this. Well, there was this one process that we did annually, and it was basically we had to make sure that everything rolled over properly, and so we had to comb through all this data. And nobody on my team really understood exactly what we were doing because this is the federal government, so everybody's siloed. And so I only know my part. I give this to you, but I have no idea what you're going to do with it, right? So we kept giving this product to this one lady who was notoriously difficult to work with. And she would be like, no, this is wrong. Do you guys even know what you're doing? Like, totally not constructive at all. And so I just decided, I think I was going through the Peacemaker material at the time, and I was like, I am going to heap burning coals on this lady. This is what I'm doing. So I was as sugary as I could be with her. Like, her diet consisted of two things. This is like, I probably should say this, but like her diet was cigarettes and Diet Coke. That's all she consumed. And like, if you picture someone that consumes only cigarettes and Diet Coke, you've got her. That's what she looked like. She only consumed those things. So I called her and I was like, hey, can you, her name was Donna, I'm really sorry. Nothing like this, Donna. And I was like, hey Donna, I'm really struggling. And I was new, everybody else like hated her on the team because they had done this before with her. And so I said, hey, could you come up and just sit with me and show me? And she came up, and at first she was just like, so what question do you have? And I was like, oh, thank you so much. And I just tried to be as kind as I could. And she's like, well, that's got to go in Roscoe. And I was like, I've never heard of Roscoe. She's like, you don't know what Roscoe is? I was like, no, I don't. And so, oh, well, let me tell you. And so I just was as attentive and kind as I could be. And by the end, I was now the expert of that process. And people, like, I was working mainly with other ladies, and they came over like, so are you and Donna going on a date later? You're over here schmoozing her. And I'm like, yeah, I'm picking her up at 7. But she was overcome by good. Like, it worked. And that worked out better for everybody. But everybody else was in this routine of, if you're going to talk to me that way, then I can't talk to you, right? So I guess we're just going to fail at this because you're impossible to deal with, right? So, probably the thing that made that easy was because she was so extremely rude and mean. So, like, at some point, it was nothing about me. It was more like, oh, well, this is easy for me. If it were somebody that was a little less edgy or ridiculous, I probably would have had a harder time. But, so yeah, it does work. So you do sometimes have that outcome. So control your tongue, speak well of them. Thank you so much. Man, you are just the expert in this. I never knew this. Nobody trained me on this. This is such good information, right? Speak well of them. What else did you see from the chapter?
Under keep doing what was right, it took my second reading till I caught what my brain was doing, but at the end of the paragraph on page 250, Paul is saying you should plan and act carefully and properly so that any reasonable person who is watching you will eventually acknowledge that what you did was right. And it took my second reading to realize I was going, I was right. And it's not what that means there.
No.
It means that my actions are glorifying God, not validating me.
Right.
And that's something I'm trying to keep checking myself. I love how he says, this doesn't mean you're a slave to others. We have to keep going back to it. It's not about us being right.
Right, yeah.
What's he calling us to do?
Yeah, and he references 1 Peter 2. So think about 1 Peter 2 in the context of conflict. Like, in conflict, live such good lives among pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us, right? What if in conflict you're like, okay, they are going to speak ill of me. They're going to try and pull me down. But they're going to see in this conflict that I have kindness, only kindness for them. And on the day that the Lord visits, they'll be like, well, I really can't say anything about that guy. He never said anything, did anything to me. He was only kind to me, right? But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander, right? So don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
I think that we see
Pull up that slide.
part of that higher purpose that we talked about.
Yes.
Right? Because in your story, let's say the outcome is just wasn't ultimately helpful and things were just as bitter as they were before, right? You go, well, I still did what God wanted me to do, and that's why I can have peace with it. So that's where peace comes from, right? It's like our actions were just the outpouring of what God has asked of us to do and shown us, right? And so that's why we can't look at this from an outcome basis.
Yes.
And then go, well, I'm going to feel good if the outcome is this. It's, I'm going to feel good about this because I've done what God wanted me to do. And maybe there's something bigger at play, and I just need to keep doing what He'd have me to do and use me as an instrument.
Yeah. So I stumbled upon this a while back, and I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I think this is like, some of this is attributed to Mother Teresa. I don't know if that's true or not, but I thought this was interesting. People are often unreasonable and self-centered. Forgive them anyway, right? If you're kind, people may accuse you of ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you're honest, people will cheat you. Be honest anyway. If you find happiness, people may be jealous of your happiness. Be happy anyway. The good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give your best anyway. Because you see, here's the highest, here's the real thing. Here's really why it matters. In the end, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. So, how we treat others, even if it doesn't have the outcome in that relationship that you wanted, guess what? It has the outcome in this relationship that we want, right? God is glorified when we do the right thing and forgive, confess, make ourselves vulnerable. Why not rather be wronged when we choose to be wronged? God is glorified. And that's really who this is between anyway. Alan?
I see that as a parallel concept to teaching others. It may not have the effect that you want it to, but you're doing what is honorable with that relationship with
Right,
God.
spreading the gospel, right?
Yeah.
God doesn't say, hey, you better fill your quota. I need 2 people per year that you convert. No. He says, you plant, you water, and I will handle the increase. Right? So just do your part. It's not, and that, to me, if you, I feel like that's basically what he's saying here. And he calls it using the ultimate weapon, right? If your enemy is hungry, feed him. Let's end with this story about Gordon, what's his last name? Ernest Gordon. Gordon is his last name. His book is To End All Wars. He was captured by the Japanese during World War II and forced with other British prisoners to endure years of horrible treatment. Jesse just finished Unbroken. Read Unbroken. That is an amazing story, true story of something kind of like this. I mean, it will break you. But here, this Ernest Gordon, he was a prisoner. Horrible treatment for years, building the notorious Railroad of Death through Thailand. Faced with starvation and disease. His captors were just brutal to them. One bright day, him and his fellow prisoners came upon a trainload of wounded Japanese soldiers who were being transported to Bangkok. Here's how Gordon describes God's work of grace. They were, and this, if you'll read with me, I'm at the bottom of page 254 in the book. They were on their own and without medical care. Their uniforms were encrusted with mud, blood, and excrement. their wounds, sorely inflamed and full of pus, crawled with maggots. We could understand now why the Japanese were so cruel to their prisoners if they didn't care for their own. These were Japanese soldiers that were wounded that had just been left. Like, oh, this is their own. How are they going to be treated? If they didn't care for their own, why would they care for us? The wounded men looked at us forlornly as they sat with their heads resting against the carriages, waiting fatalistically for death. They were the refuse of war. There was nowhere to go and no one to care for them. Without a word, most of the officers in my section unbuckled their packs, took out part of their ration and a rag or two, and with water canteens in their hands, went over to the Japanese train to help them. Our guards tried to prevent us, but we ignored them and knelt by the side of the enemy to give them food and water, to clean up and bind up their wounds, to smile and say a kind word. Grateful cries of arigato, thank you, followed us when we left. So he is a prisoner being led by Japanese soldiers. They see other Japanese soldiers that are suffering, and they walk over and are kind to them and start binding their wounds. They're prisoners themselves. And they do this, right? 18 months ago, they would have readily joined in the destruction of our captors had they fallen into their hands. Now the same men were dressing the enemy's wounds. We had experienced a moment of grace there in those blood-stained railway cars. God had broken through the barriers of our prejudice and had given us the will to obey his command, thou shalt love. All right, so we'll finish up this chapter and this study on Wednesday, Lord willing.